Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 23rd of May 2024. This is the Geopolitics news video for today. We're going to start with a topic that we've been dealing with an awful lot over the last few days, which is the ongoing argument concerning the use of US provided weapons and indeed allied weapons inside Russia at the behest of constriction of the US administration. So it's them providing weapons to Ukraine, but also allies providing weapons to Ukraine, and US saying, please don't use them, otherwise you won't get any further weapons. Please don't use them inside Russian territory. Now, here is the New York Times. So we had a New York Times interview and article and whatnot. Here's a transcript of the interview. I'm finding this very useful when media organizations do this. Time magazine did this recently when they interviewed, or when they had that whole article on Trump with someone who had spent some time with Trump, and they produced the article, which was itself interesting. But of course, when you have a reporter taking a transcript of an interview and turning that into an article, it's their subjective opinion about what is important, and that gets woven into a narrative that the reporter has, whereas the whole transcript will have loads of other nuggets that reporter might not see as important, but we as the audience might go, actually, I'm more interested in that area of what the interviewee said. So this is the key points lifted by Timothy Milovanov, who's the previous economy minister for Ukraine, giving a summary of what he found from the New York Times transcript of the Zelensky interview. So the US policy of no strikes on Russia. So Zelensky said, I have asked Blinken, I have asked Sullivan. So these are the two people, two of the main advisors within the Biden administration. I've asked everyone, let us strike Russians when they gather at the border to attack us. Russians put their artillery just across the border and hit our civilians. We can't respond with the US weapons because the US prohibits us. We watch Russia amassing troops together, which will strike us tomorrow and can do nothing. There is no risk of escalation, says Zelensky. It has already occurred. Our partners are afraid of completely breaking relations with Russia. If Putin uses nuclear weapons, it will become completely isolated from the world, and he doesn't want that. He could have used nuclear weapons when he lost in the first year of the war, but didn't. NATO troops in Ukraine, so far, the idea hasn't gone anywhere. I hear about it from the news, but nothing else. Of course, this is me talking. We do understand that there are trainers or certain troops or indeed personnel. It's hard to know who they are and what job they're doing because there's absolutely no clarity, but there have been several nations who have suggested that there are troops already operating or personnel operating in Ukraine to do some job or another. Technically, says Zelensky, it's possible to shoot down Russian missiles over Ukraine from NATO territory. So what's stopping NATO countries? We need 120 to 130 F-16s. Russia has 300 active aircraft. I would like Ukraine to get an invitation to NATO before the war is over. And those who believe that they are economic partners with Russia and it will never attack them are wrong. Wasn't it the same with the Ukraine? Wasn't it the main economic partner then? We need 7 Patriots or similar systems in Ukraine. It will cover critical areas. And there's a link to the transcript there. So interesting stuff from Zelensky. This is an ongoing issue. Indeed, The Hill now writes in an article by Mark Toth and Jonathan Sweet that Ukraine's fate is in Biden's hand. Will he once again make the wrong choice? So the idea is that it's the administration have a decision to make over whether weapons can be used to attack targets within Russian territory. Ample justification already exists to establish a no-fly zone, is another thing they talk about here. For example, Russian cruise missiles have several times overflown NATO countries on their way to targets in Ukraine, violating Polish, Romanian and Moldovan airspace. Putin also continues to intentionally target and kill Ukrainian civilians. Recent Russian strikes in Odessa using cluster munitions provide proof enough of Putin's war crimes and crimes against humanity, as do increasing strikes against Kharkiv. And that's happened today. Huge strikes against Kharkiv, possibly 15 missiles slamming into residential properties. It's terrible. Iran's recent attack on Israel is dispositive of why a no-fly zone is essential. Despite Tehran's bravado and its use of the very same Shahed drones and cruise missiles Russia is using in Ukraine, Iran's attack was 99.99% ineffectual due to the combined air defences of Israel, the US, the UK and unnamed Arab states. Well, Jordan. Israeli, also Saudi Arabia, I believe, helped to some extent. Israeli civilians deserved protection from Iran, so too do Ukrainian civilians from Russian aerial attacks. It is past time for Biden and NATO to draw and enforce this red line. So it's about taking the red lines to Putin, not just sitting back and accepting Putin's red lines. Early on in Putin's war, there were fears that any imposition of a no-fly zone would lead to a direct military confrontation between NATO and Russia and potentially to a full-scale war. However, as evidenced in Israel and over the skies of Syria during Iran's attack on April 13th, Washington and Moscow were able to avoid one another. They have done so for most of Syria's civil war, which sees the US and Russian military forces acting in close proximity on a daily basis. Putin likely does not want to take on NATO. As it is, the Kremlin's air and sea forces cannot effectively engage Ukraine. They cannot control the skies over Ukraine, nor can they operate with impunity in the Black Sea. The last thing Moscow needs now is to confront NATO air and defensive assets. Implementing a no-fly zone in western Ukraine will not likely lead to World War II like dogfights or NATO or US aircraft downing the Russian bombers. Rather, it will help deter Russian drone and cruise missile attacks and diminish their effectiveness, as was witnessed over the skies of Israel, Jordan, Syria and Iraq last month. The opportunity for the strategic game changer is here for the taking. Biden once again finds himself at an inflection point. Biden once advised Obama not to conduct the raid that ultimately killed Osama bin Laden. Now he faces a similar decision. Will he become the man who would have let bin Laden escape and then let Ukraine fall, or is he willing to fill Roosevelt's shoes and stand on the right side of history and on the right side of humanity? So there you go, and on it goes. So this is actually advocating for a no-fly zone as opposed to the use of missiles so much, although that is, of course, part of it. It's the ball is certainly in the administration's court right now, and there's pressure coming from all directions. What it would be good to see would be some of the mainstream Republicans piling in on this as well. I think it would be politically opportune for them to do so. I'm not a Republican. I don't support Republican politics at all. But if I was a strategist for the Republicans, you could play some merry havoc with people who are getting disillusioned with the Republican behavior and whatnot, certainly with regard to the Ukraine war, and you could get them back on side by positioning yourself the other side of the Biden regime rather than playing the pro-Putin card. If you did what McCall is saying and act, in line with that kind of thinking, then you would be getting a politically won over, I think, Biden and the administration, who would look weak in comparison. But instead, at the moment, most of the Republican, well, at least the more vocal ones, are sitting much further down in the pro-Putin camp, and so Biden looks stronger than them, because even though Biden looks weak, it's by default stronger than that position. So I think there could be some interesting politicking that could happen there, because unfortunately people like McCall are making all the right arguments, but they don't appear to be enough in the majority, even though they probably are. Most Republican politicians would agree with people like McCall calling for Ukraine to be able to use American missiles inside Russia. I think most would agree, but not many are being vocal enough about it. Now, I'm going to go over to the UK. So, as I mentioned yesterday, Rishi Sunak has called an election. Now, I just want to mention a couple of things here. Just to give you a bit of background, back in 1997, when Tony Blair and Cool Britannia and New Labour, so reinvented Labour, took it to the centre ground, copied, as I'd mentioned before, Bill Clinton's approach to focus groups and swing voters, said, right, we're going to give you a manifesto for swing voters. Also, it's been 18 years of the Tories, so you're all kind of bored of that. So we're going to have a big change. And they had this song called Things Can Only Get Better by D-Ream. Interestingly, the D-Ream keyboardist was at one stage Brian Cox, Professor Brian Cox, who does all this stargazing stuff. Anyway, they had this song, Things Can Only Get Better. And that was the song that went alongside the whole Labour campaign. So we're going to make changes. Things can only get better. This is all rubbish. Anyway, yesterday, when Rishi Sunak went out to announce the election taking place on July the 4th, which no one can understand why he's doing that. It will not benefit the Tories at all. Just a weird decision. And two things happened. One, there was a song playing in the background. I think it's Stephen, what's his name? Stephen Brady, guy that always trolls interviews with like EU flags if they're doing Brexit interviews and plays music and stuff. Anyway, he was playing Things Can Only Get Better, which was trolling Rishi Sunak because of This Is Labour, and this was what their campaign was in 1997 when they took over from a long Conservative rule. And so that was going on. And then it rained, and it was such a bad decision to go out and do this announcement when it was inclement weather and there was no umbrellas. It was not undercover, just out on the lectern. Anyway, Rishi Sunak got absolutely pelted by rain, and it was really bad optics. It was terrible optics. There were cartoons that had been made today. And of course, everyone's doing Things Can Only Get Wetter, right? And that is now the tagline along with this. And it's just terrible optics. And it goes to show that, you know, optics really are important. Think of in the UK's political past when Theresa May was making a speech and the background fell down and she had that cough. And then you had Ed Miliband eating the bacon sandwich going all over his face. And there's just certain things you just don't want to happen. Now, it's not going to make any difference to Rishi Sunak at the moment. But had this been, like, had the Conservatives had a real shout at this next election, this would have been just doubly worse. But as it was, it's like a bit of a laughable situation. But it's like par for the course at the moment for the Conservatives. But anyway, things can only get wetter. Now, with regard to the Ukraine war, is there some interesting analysis, just a very short bit of analysis in Ukraine, the latest yesterday, which is Daily Telegraph run podcast, very pro-conservative, normally at least anyway. They are concerned, though, very much with Ukraine and how the government is or isn't helping Ukraine and what's going to happen going forward. Now, the general accepted position is that, so we had two of the, who do we have? David Lammy and John Healey, who were the Labour shadow foreign secretary and defence secretary, out in Kiev recently. So the Labour Party is definitely going to just continue as we have seen things going with UK support for Ukraine. So it seems to be Ukraine's in safe hands, at least politically, with bipartisan support in the UK. However, there is some analysis to say, do you know what? Labour need to differentiate themselves. To say, look, when we take over, you need to vote for us because we're going to do X, rather than saying we're going to take what they've done and we're just going to continue that. Well, what's the point of voting for Labour if you're only thinking about Ukraine? So there is some analysis to suggest that actually they should do something a bit different. So what is it that they could do that's a bit different? Because actually Grant Shapps has been upping the support for Ukraine. He's been putting money where the mouth is. There's been increased budgetary support and military equipment support. In fact, today, another £150 million package has been announced by Grant Shapps in terms of certain components of electronic warfare, radars, and so on and so forth. So if Labour come in, you know, they need to say, but we're going to do this. So what could they do? And some ideas might be that actually we fully do much more vocally support allied trainers in Ukraine. So getting forces over to Ukraine, maybe supporting with much more vocally with, you can use our missiles. We would like you to use Storm Shadow missiles to shoot into Russia. So like taking what the UK are already doing, but somehow upping it, somehow leaning into certain ideas to say, yeah, that's what the Conservatives have done, and actually we've been very much in support of that. So that this is one area where we have agreed with the Conservatives, but we are going to improve it by doing X and Y. I don't necessarily know what those things could be, but just some ideas there for you. Now, Shashank Joshi here, the defence correspondent for The Economist, who normally would side centre-right, will be a big moment for Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer is will be the new Prime Minister almost certainly, unless something bonkers happens. And of course, campaign season, we got 6 weeks, is it? It is going to, you know, mental things can happen that you can't predict. But all things remaining equal, it's likely to be Keir Starmer, who is a safe pair of hands. I know some people don't like him. They think he's boring, no charisma. But actually, that's kind of maybe what's needed. Will be a big moment for Starmer and new ministers. A very significant NATO summit is to take place 5 days after the probable election win. So on July the 4th, if Keir Starmer and the Labour Party either outright win or get a coalition majority, they'll have to hit the ground running, because they have to then go to a NATO summit in DC, and there's going to be some really big things going on there. So they definitely need to get in their heads sorted what they are going to do with Ukraine and how they're going to support. There's no doubt that they are going to support. They've already been over there. That is very clear. Just how they're going to support and how they're going to change things and what they're going to do in that NATO, what the positioning will be in the NATO summit is obviously remains to be seen. Now, Zelensky himself will apparently go to France to ask NATO to shoot down, and apparently Italy as well, to shoot down Russian missiles like in Israel, according to Politico. I reported that earlier today in the military aid video. So that's a big thing at the moment. Not only missiles going into or weaponry, munitions being able to be used into Russian territory, but NATO members helping to protect the skies over Ukraine. Right. Emil Castellhelmi says, who's Finnish, says, here in Finland, the last 24 hours have been geopolitically unusual, to say the least, right? Reports from Russia suggested a unilateral desire to modify their maritime borders in the Gulf of Finland and near Kaliningrad. The Finnish government learned about this through the media. The government tried to get more information as the Russians didn't inform Finland. Suddenly, Russia reversed its previous stance, and there were no more ambitions to check or move the borders. The Finnish politicians assured that there's no drama involved. However, the incident needs to be put into context. Why did Russia suddenly do this? Russia is a dictatorship that views Finland as a hostile country. In the recent years, it has conducted several operations against Finland, aiming to undermine security or societal functions. Examples of Russian attacks against Finland include hybrid operations using weaponized migration at the border, presumed destruction of critical energy infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, electronic warfare like GPS jamming, and various cyber attacks. Changes to the boundaries of the maritime areas are not exceptional per se. They were last made between Finland and Russia in 2017. However, this time, there are good reasons to interpret Russian actions primarily as provocations. Russia did not inform Finnish leadership or authorities of its plans in any way. This was done most likely because Russia wanted to see how Finland reacts. Russia did not publish additional information of its goals, even though such a sensitive issue would have required it. Confusion was maintained on purpose. Russia could have published maps and coordinates of the border changes it planned, but they let the unclear situation continue without further explanation. The officials then removed the documents about the subject from the web. Now, this is often what Russia does, right? Is to sow confusion, so people don't really know what's going on, and they throw out loads of ideas, see how things land, and learn from that, and maybe adjust accordingly. So this is par for the course, sowing confusion, not being particularly clear on what their intentions were, then taking it down, and then people are left going, oh, what's going on? Overall, this was not ordinary diplomatic interaction, but deliberate provocation, a calculated maneuver, says Emil Castellhelmi. Perhaps Russia wanted to signal that it does not fear the West, and that NATO membership doesn't mean a country is safe and arbitrary territorial demands. From arbitrary territorial demands. The West can indeed be seen as weak. In Ukraine, the West repeatedly bows to Russia's red lines and is willing to indirectly sacrifice tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers out of fear of escalation. The Kremlin laughs at the cowards and escalates further elsewhere. Russia constantly wants to test the Western boundaries. It is interested in how far it can push the provocations and how the West reacts to this. Metaphorically, it's about seeing how deep it can push the bayonet before hitting steel. This is, to use another metaphor, pushing the envelope. They just will push the envelope. They'll get up to the line as far as they can, maybe get over the line and see what the reactions are, and say, oh no, sorry about that, my mistake, and then start again. Just push here, push there. At some point, I mean, my opinion is Russia are taking a piss, and at some point we just got to go, stop messing about. I'm not advocating hitting children or anything like you can imagine I'm doing there, but there needs to be some kind of cuffing of the Russian diplomacy of the Kremlin, essentially, to the point where, like, no, enough's enough. You guys stop it. Just bloody stop it. To defeat the armed forces of Russia, Ukraine would need Western soldiers on its soil. But this idea causes confused and unclear positions from politicians. If an aggressive dictatorship didn't occasionally slap such an opponent in the face, it would be a wonder. Some peculiar comments emerged from the maritime border issue. For example, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Kimmo Kiljunen, said that it cannot be in Russia's interest to acquire a troublesome NATO neighbour instead of a good neighbourly relationship. He is talking about the same Russia for whose hostile actions a new border law is being drafted. Many politicians said that decisions are only made on the basis of facts and more info is needed. This was apparently meant to be a reassuring statement. In reality, it wasn't. The absence of facts and information, especially in this context, is not a normal situation, but a deliberate act from Russia. It's an effort to control the information space and cause further confusion. The politicians should understand this. And how did Russia comment on this? Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denied that the maritime border project was political, but noted that, quote, the increased level of tension and confrontation requires appropriate actions by Russia to ensure security, as if, like, Finland had been dabbling with messing around with the border. Russia doesn't have any immediate tools to go further with this. It seems they got the reaction and didn't continue with further claims. However, I'm certain they will try other provocations in the future. And I guess it's just, prodding and probing to see what they can eventually achieve. And what they learn about reactions from certain countries to such envelope pushing. Now, here we've got Shashank Joshi reporting from some news source. I don't know it, news.err.ee, so I think it's probably Estonian or similar. Russia's border guard removed more than 20 buoys demarcating shipping lanes from the Narva River on Thursday, May the 23rd, Estonia's PPA said. The government is seeking clarification. Estonia installed the markers in its waters based on the State Borders Act, and the buoy's location was agreed by the border agency in 2022. However, this year Russia disagreed with the locations of approximately half of the 250 markers. So they've nicked the border markers. So it's like, stop pissing about. Like, honestly, stop it, Russia. So they are just prodding and probing in the cyberspace, in the information space, with maritime borders, with geographical borders, like land borders of Ukraine. They're invading. They're doing sanctions evasion, the ghost shipping, and they're getting Wagner involved in the Sahel region in Africa. They're prodding, they're probing, all over the place. For given the population size they have, Russia does have outsized influence. I think it's a massive country geographically, but of course that most of that country is just open land, right? Really 140 million people compared to like 330 million of the US. I think Russia do get a pretty good bang for their buck in terms of causing disruption and confusion around the world. And of course China is just loving that as well, because it will fit in line with what their intentions are in the main. Edward Hunter Christie here says, well, we're getting closer and closer to Russia committing an actual act of war against a NATO ally. What's he talking about? This is not the first incident. So Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk yesterday said Russia may have been involved in a fire that destroyed a shopping centre in Warsaw, thankfully without casualties. And apparently, I think there are other fires possibly that have taken place. Also, you've had the espionage stuff that's happening. If we go back in time, it's like putting cameras to look at the transport of weaponry involved in going to Ukraine, and that was found out. Then you've just had 9 people arrested. I think maybe a further 3 as well, so it might even be 12 people arrested in Poland just now for espionage-related activities. This is bad. And again, Russia is prodding and probing. They are doing things that are outright hostile. if Donald Tusk, saying they're likely, and the problem is likely still allows for plausible deniability. So likely gets you to, what is it, 75? Is it 55 to 75% in intelligence speak? So if Russia are likely behind that, you can say, look, we've got pretty good money on the fact that it was them, or the claim that it was them, but actually there's still like 25% where it might not be. And of course, that means that Russia can still adopt their plausible deniability. Hey, it wasn't us, or it was a rogue element, or whatever, or they just keep quiet. And then Poland, like, damn it, like, is that quite enough? There's a bit of a grey area. When is it enough that Poland can react to that? Like, I've talked about this before in terms of cyber warfare. It's a very similar thing, which is, hang on, you've just attacked our waterworks in the US. Say the US when they had on the pipeline that was disabled as well. So you've got utilities in the US being attacked by the Russian cyber gangs or hackers, and you're like, this is war. Okay, it's not a tank driving onto our territories, but there are hackers that are destroying infrastructure in the US. Like, at what point can we go, right, that's it, mate, you've done it? I'm not asking for war, but rather than just sitting back and going, that was Russia. I had an argument the other day on Twitter with an American who's very, like, anti-Ukraine, it seems, and it was just giving me all the usual bloody tropes, all the same crap. It's like debunk. One of the things he said was I just found it quite staggering. I was like, you do realise that the US is being cyber attacked at the moment. He's like, why are we interested in Russia? Like, Taiwan should be our problem, blah blah, all these kind of usual things. Russia aren't doing anything to us. It's like, you do realise they've literally cyber attacked you. Here's what they did with the water utilities, here the sandworm cyber attack, blah blah blah. And his answer is like, because obviously there's going to be cognitive dissonance reduction. He can't change his opinion, of course. Heaven forfend, you might actually change your mind in light of rational evidence. So it's like, how do I deal with this evidence that goes against my position? It's like, they're always cyber attacking, aren't they? Oh, that's all right. Oh, my sister got murdered. Oh, but it's okay, because murders always happen, don't they? Let's do nothing about them, because, they just happen a lot. It's just this, and this guy is a critical thinker, supposedly. He used to write for me in my blog and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, dude, where have your critical faculties gone, mate? You used to argue in the same way I did. We used to, write together, and you had great points, etc., etc. And now you've gone down this political rabbit hole where you're involved in, like, anti-woke culture, and you've just gone deep in the whole MAGA mindset. You're like, oh, so now you just can't use critical faculties. Like, oh, well, cyber attacks, silly Russia. Gee whiz, man. Like, what is happening? Anyway, meanwhile, Russia are just going around being like absolute numbnuts around the world. Norway has said, right, we've had enough. So they banned Russian tourists, from May the 29th. Press release from the Norwegian government states that the restriction applies to those with visas issued by Norway until spring 2022, as well as to visas issued by other Schengen countries. Interesting. The EU is preparing to tighten sanctions against Belarus, through which Russia is able to continue its war effort. Sanctions will ban export of technologies and goods used for military purposes, as well as LNG, so that's liquefied natural gas, and the import of diamonds will also be stopped. Actually, some further details just come out. The EU is preparing to tighten sanctions, and one of the loopholes is that there has been an allowance for Russia to import luxury cars and other Western goods banned by previous sanctions through Belarus. The new curbs currently discussed aim to minimise the risk of such circumvention. Now, Georgia's foreign agents law could be dropped in return for a US support bill. Interesting here. Okay, let's dip into this. So a foreign agents law in Georgia that has brought hundreds of thousands of protesters onto the streets of Tbilisi could be dropped in return for a package of economic and security support from Washington, the ruling party has hinted. This is the whole carrot and stick, right? So what do you do with Georgia? Do you go, and actually I think this is the right option. So because I think if you go, we are going to ostracize you, we're going to isolate Georgia, and we are going to hammer sanctions on you, that will probably push Georgia further towards Russia. It's kind of what you feel like doing. It's that retributive sense that we have inside us. Those natural, what's sometimes called in psychology and philosophy, reactive attitudes, that you can't help but have them, and you're like, we're going to punish you for that. But actually, probably the best thing to do here is, Georgia, you've done some naughty things. What we're going to do is bribe you to do nicer things in future. And actually that, I think, generally has a better effect on changing behaviour. And you see this in like behaviour management of children as well. Interestingly, it's fairly similar. So in response to a draft bill tabled in the US Congress that would open up talks on a trade deal in return for fresh commitments on civil rights, the governing Georgian Dream Party said it would need to see progress on such promises within a year. The party's ruling body, known as the Political Council, issued a statement on Tuesday in which it insisted that the government would not be blackmailed, but also signalled that a way out of the crisis was possible if there was a swift progress on preferential trade terms and visa liberalisation. Quote, our partners can significantly rearrange their relationships within a year maximum, the party said. If they realise this, the relations will be settled very quickly, but if they continue to act in the same approach towards Georgia, it will damage both Georgia and America's interests. So on and so forth, and it can go, there's lots more detail in there, but you get the point. So this is the carrot versus the stick, and honestly, could well be, it's like a bidding war with Georgia, isn't it? So Russia and the West, if you like, in this case the US, but Russia and EU and US are going to be bidding for Georgia's acquiescence to an ideology, right? Like, we want you to come to us, so here's a pack of Skittles, and then Georgia are going to go, whoa, okay, pack of Skittles and some borscht. Georgia, like, I suppose it's better than nothing. Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, and then the US and EU go, well, okay, and maybe a ticket to the cinema, so on and so forth. So I think you might get into this sort of frame of thinking. Now, Russia will be offering probably more nefarious things under the radar. It'll be interesting to see where this all goes and what Georgia will do, and they will know. The Georgian Dream Party will be able to read the tea leaves, right? So in the upcoming elections, they will no doubt get hammered. So either they change a course of action, but do it in a way that they can do it without losing too much face. So if they just did a complete about face after those protests, then it would have looked like they were just capitulating to mob rule, and that they were going against the Russian way of thinking. Whereas doing it this way, it looks like they're just doing like politics and whatnot. So they'll be reading the tea leaves and seeing that they're not going to get voted in. The choice is, do we change the political mechanisms so that we can ensure our power, which will be this is a very volatile population that will know what we're doing. If we change laws about change the electoral laws that will make it look like we're just rigging the system so we stay in power, then it's going to get worse. So maybe that's not a good option. Maybe we do need to just change direction, but we need to give ourselves permission to do this. And maybe if we can bring back beneficial things, so the US is giving us stuff, and then we can hold that stuff up to the population, say, okay, sorry about that, we've changed our tack on this, but look at all the stuff we've got. Ooh, Skittles and cinema tickets, if you get my meaning. So Serbia, though, is next to consider the foreign agents law. Republika Srpska 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters before you get a vowel is not how to write words. Anyway, Republika Srpska in Bosnia did. So this is the foreign agents law. So we've got Bosnia, Kyrgyzstan did, Slovakia is eyeing a similar thing, and of course Hungary and Russia have done these. Russia is going around, it seems, to these different countries saying, here's a law, and just photocopied it from them, and from the one we gave them. Here's that law. Sorry, I've Tipexed out Kyrgyzstan, and I've put Serbia And I think you should take this on. And by the way, if you don't, this will happen. And if you do, this will happen. So there you go. And different nations appear to be in that neck of the woods, or in the sphere of influence of Russia, seem to be willing to take on this foreign agents law. We all know what's happening in Georgia. It says here, all this goes on simultaneously. It can't be a coincidence. It's part of Russia's war of terror. This is in response to Jakub Bielamovich, who is a Central Southeastern Europe, Western Balkans expert in the Institute of New Europe, said Serbia's movement of socialists, a satellite party of Vucic's regime that is led by US-sanctioned Deputy Prime Minister Vulin, is pushing for a Russia-style law to restrict activities of foreign NGOs operating in the country. The bill should closely resemble Georgia's law on foreign agents. There you go, Serbia. Very much in the sphere of influence of Russia. And then finally, China has sanctioned 12 American military companies and 10 defense executives over US arms sales to Taiwan, and sanctions against Chinese firms the US is accused of aiding Russia in its war against Ukraine. Oh my goodness. So, I mean, I talked about this yesterday, but I forgot to show this to you. This is an escalation that is worrying. This is truly worrying, but it's almost like a Greek tragedy. You can't have it any other way. It's like you have to sanction Chinese entities for doing the wrong thing. But of course, China is a massive player in global geopolitics, and they're going to say, oh yeah, or we're going to sanction you. And then the US is going to be like, oh yeah, and then we're going to do this. And oh yeah, we're going to do that. And that tit for tat escalation is inching people closer to war, right? It's like you can't not do the right thing because of the threat of what China might do. So we just need to remain strong and hope that in this big game of chicken, China backs down because China has more to lose. Perhaps, China is... I think more people would like to be on the US's side than China's side, really, despite what people might say. And the China's Belt and Road Initiative, people are looking at that and going, well, actually, that's more in China's best interests, and what happens on default payments there. And okay, look what happened with Sri Lanka. So you're looking at saying, well, who would I rather have on side, the US or China, an authoritarian versus a democratic nation? I'll probably opt for the US, and China could end up like properly isolated from the EU and from the US. And I would hope that they would back down in the game of chicken, but we'll see. I mean, this is not good news for global peace, but at the same time, we shouldn't be bullied by China's action, even though China's saying, well, we shouldn't be bullied by US's action in terms of sanctions. But, at the end of the day, the US is on the right side here, the right moral and political side. You shouldn't be helping Russia. Russia are the bad guys. And so you need to be held account for doing that. Anyway, there you go. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. I really appreciate your support. Toodle pip. Speak soon.